particularly sensitive question, which I'm sure has crossed many of our minds over the last couple of weeks, is whether or not mercy towards our enemies has a place within war. On the one hand, in these past couple of weeks, it certainly has not been a courtesy that's been shown to us. But on the other hand, mercy has always been seen as an extremely positive trait, a characteristic throughout the Torah. It's a characteristic that we associate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that Chazal teach us that the way to connect to God is to emulate God, and specifically they mention, just as God is merciful, so too you should be merciful. In which case, perhaps we should consider adopting a merciful take towards our enemies in wartime. Right? But of course, throughout Tanakh, you can see that our general value towards mercy becomes a little bit more complicated, of course, when we are at war and facing our enemies. Most famously, you have Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech was directed to wipe out the entire nation of Amalek, even including their animals, but Shaul HaMelech has mercy on their king, as well as some of their animals. His thought process was, he struggled. He had a difficulty seeing the justice or seeing the compassion, or rather just seeing how it could be right to really wipe out the entire nation. Nonetheless, this is his failure which results in his loss of the kingship. So, how exactly do we navigate these difficult circumstances? On the one hand, mercy being an almost universally held positive trait, but on the other hand, we have precedents in Tanakh for people being punished for showing too much mercy in war. So, first of all, I think that it's important to note there's a common mistake that I think is made in ethics and in values and in character development, which is, here is this positive trait, I'm going to adopt this trait in every instance, in every circumstance, and with no proportionality whatsoever. Okay, so I think kindness is a good trait, so I will always be as kind as I could be, with no regard for the situation. Or selfishness is a bad trait, so I will never be selfish. But the truth is, most things, most traits, ones that we generally see as positive and ones that we generally see as negative, everything has their time and their place and their appropriate use and their appropriate proportion. Obviously, there are times that you need to put yourself first. Obviously, there are times where kindness is not the only answer or even the best answer in this specific instance. And we lose sight of that because it involves a bit of complexity. We want to say, here are the good traits, always do these things 100%. Here are the bad things, never do these things. But the truth is, there's a time and a place for everything. I think the Gemara makes this point very, very clearly in Masechet Makot. Masechet Makot is dealing with a Beit Din's frequency of conviction. How often should a Beit Din convict someone who is liable to the death penalty? Perhaps every 7 years, or perhaps every 70 years, even suggests the Gemara, is too often. And a Beit Din that would convict someone and put them to death more than once every 70 years has blood on their hands, right? They're a particularly harmful, damaging Beit Din. That, of course, is an extremely conservative use of power on the Beit Din's behalf, because certainly there are more people who are doing things that's liable to the death penalty than once every 70 years. Nonetheless, Rabbi Akiva says, if I were the Av Beit Din, if I were in charge, I would never put someone to death. I would always find a way within our system to create the reasonable doubt necessary not to put this person to death. Rabbi Akiva here is, of course, championing this approach of, I will show mercy. I will find a way to suggest innocence towards the person in front of us. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel responds that Rabbi Akiva, that approach is not lowering murder in Klal Yisrael, right? Because you wouldn't have put the person convicted to death. Rather, you're increasing the amount of murderers in Klal Yisrael. Because now there's no prevention and really no notable repercussions for their actions. See, this debate that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel are having here is really our question. Maybe you could say that it is of value to find a way to find this person innocent. However, you're not considering the broader implications of that decision, of what it might look like if you have murderers running rampant on the streets who are noticing that there's really no repercussions for their actions. So Rabbi Akiva's attempts to be merciful are ultimately less merciful for the general population, who is now more subject to some of the worst people in society, unchecked by any form of punishment. He tried to be merciful. He was trying to lower the loss of life in Klal Yisrael, but the decisions that he made were actually going to increase it. And we see these considerations, I think, in wartime as well. So in Devarim, in discussing coming into Eretz Yisrael, where we were facing several impending wars, the Torah says, first and foremost, you have the responsibility to send ahead and offer peace. You have to offer the possibility to make peace. Now, peace is on our terms, right? We can't allow for peace and then do whatever you want, and next to us, right? There are appropriate terms for this peace, but peace has to be the first option. We see Yehoshua doing this in person. The Gemara Yerushalmi Masechet Shvi notes that when Yehoshua came to Eretz Yisrael, he sent ahead and he said, anyone who wants to leave, we're coming in. Anyone who wants to leave, they can leave and they'll be unharmed. Anyone who wants to make peace with us can make peace and they will be unharmed. But anyone who wants to fight with us, get ready for a fight. And that fight is not pretty, right? That fight is particularly gruesome, in fact. David HaMelech describes in detail his conquests in war and how he does not leave his enemies behind until they're completely annihilated. The Midrash in the Sifri, I believe, speaks about once you have fulfilled your responsibilities of peace first, what ensues will be a particularly gruesome war. And it may even have impact on civilians. That's regrettable and ideally avoidable, but if not, it's baked into the cake. It's part of what happens. That's why you offer peace first. It's part of this, though. We realize it's going to happen, and you're not going to lose a Kadosh Baruch Hu's support because it happens. You did what you were supposed to do. Nonetheless, the implications of being at war are likely to be terrible for both sides. But we need to address the question of why. Why does it need to be so bad, right? Why can't it be a little bit less violent, a little bit less extreme, right? Perhaps we don't completely defeat the enemies. We don't completely wipe them out. We don't completely strike them down. Just we do the bare minimum necessary for maintaining our presence here. So here the Torah says that specifically when it comes to societies, to people who are close by to you, you have to be concerned for learning from their inappropriate ways. This is something that we see throughout Sefer Shoftim, right? We fail in Sefer Yehoshua to completely banish the morally abhorrent nations from Eretz Yisrael, and we continually learn from them. We continually are impacted and influenced by them. We continually abandon the Kadosh Baruch Hu and worship idols, and there is a constant, generation after generation, impact of not driving these people out of the land once and for all. Furthermore, and this is a point that Rav Kook makes in his Igrot that Rav Malamed summarizes in Pnei Halacha Ha'am V'Ha'aretz, he says, when it comes to war, if you don't defeat the enemy, don't lie to yourself. They're coming back, right? They're coming back with a vengeance. So you're going to, take out a chunk from them. They're going to respond. You'll respond 5 years later. They'll respond 10 years later. You're looking at a perpetual, never-ending war where no side can ever fully feel safe, and where you're just going to face again and again and again the prospect of one side being slaughtered. In the short term, it may feel uncomfortable, it may feel downright wrong and despicable to wipe your enemy out. But in the long term, you have to consider what the repercussions are of leaving your enemy around to attack you back in 5 years, for you to attack them in 5 years, and allowing this chain of violence to essentially become a never-ending one. So the point I think that the Torah is trying to make is that we don't hide from the gruesome nature of war. We don't embrace it, and we don't desire it. We want peace, if possible. But we are ready for war if that's what it comes to, and we need to be ready for all the implications that war comes with. We have to be committed not to allow ourselves to repeat a cycle of violence which is never ending, which has our citizens under constant threat of the recourse of the enemies every 10 to 20 years whenever they rebuild their forces.